I was losing my mind. That's what my son told the court. That's what his wife whispered to anyone who'd listen at the senior center, at the grocery store, at church, that I was confused, forgetful, a liability, that I couldn't be trusted to manage my own affairs anymore. And the thing is, I let them believe it. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer for the county, designed drainage systems for half the suburbs in this part of Oregon, raised 2 kids, buried a wife. I know exactly what year it is, what my social security number is, and how much is sitting in every account I own. But when my son started making his move, I made a decision that went against every instinct I had. I stayed quiet. I played confused. I shuffled around in my slippers and forgot names on purpose and let him think he was winning. Best decision I ever made? My son's name is Marcus. He's 41. He works in commercial real estate in Portland, drives a car that costs more than most people's annual salary, and has a handshake that's just a little too firm. The kind where a man is always reminding you he's in charge. His wife is Renata. She's the kind of woman who redecorates every 2 years and refers to a 4-bedroom house as cozy. I love my son. I want to say that clearly, because what I'm about to tell you isn't the story of a man who hates his child. It's the story of a man who watched his child turn into someone he didn't recognize and had to make a choice about what to do about it. It started about 2 years after my wife Linda passed. She died of a stroke. Fast, like a light switching off, which I'm told is a mercy, but never quite feels like one. We'd been married 42 years. The house, the savings, the investment accounts, everything was joint. When she died, it all came to me. That's not a fortune, but it's not nothing. The house is paid off. The retirement accounts are healthy, and I had a small commercial property on the edge of town that I'd bought 20 years ago on a hunch, which turned out to be a good hunch when that part of town developed. Marcus knew the numbers. I'd been transparent with him his whole life, about money, about plans, about what Linda and I wanted for the family after we were gone. Half to him, half to his sister, Pauline. That was always the plan. Simple. Fair. Then, Renata sat down at my kitchen table one Sunday afternoon and started talking about estate planning. She brought a folder. It had dividers. I didn't say much that day. Just listened. She talked about probate costs, about tax exposure, about how it made so much sense to simplify things now. Marcus nodded along like a man who'd rehearsed what they were proposing. What they dressed up in all that careful language was that I transfer the commercial property into an LLC that Marcus would manage, and that I grant him financial power of attorney, just in case. Just in case. I told them I'd think about it. Marcus hugged me at the door a little too long. That night, I sat in Linda's chair in the living room, and I thought for a long time. I thought about the way Renata's eyes moved when she talked about the property. I thought about the folder with the dividers, and I thought about a conversation I'd had with Marcus 6 months earlier when he'd mentioned almost offhandedly that his firm was having a tough quarter. I called Pauline the next morning. She lives in Albuquerque with her husband and their 2 girls. I told her what Marcus and Renata had proposed. There was a long pause on the phone. "Dad," she said carefully, "did they bring documents?" They had. Another pause. "Don't sign anything." I didn't sign anything. And that's when things started to shift. At first it was subtle. Marcus started calling more, which sounds like a good thing but wasn't. The calls had a quality to them, a checking in that felt more like inventory than affection. He started mentioning things I'd supposedly forgotten. "Remember, Dad, you told me you couldn't figure out how to pay the utility bill online." I had not said that. "You seemed really confused at Thanksgiving about what year it was." I had not been confused. He was building something. I just didn't know yet what the structure would look like. Then, in March, about 14 months ago now, he called to tell me he'd spoken to my doctor, my primary care physician, a man named Dr. Okafor, who I've seen for 11 years. He told Marcus, he said, that he had concerns about my cognitive function. I called Dr. Okafor that same afternoon. Dr. Okafor that same afternoon. Okafor had no idea what I was talking about. He had not spoken to Marcus. He had not expressed any concerns. He sounded confused, and then, after a pause, he sounded something else. He asked if I wanted him to document that conversation. I said yes. I also asked him if he'd be willing to conduct a formal cognitive evaluation, the full battery, everything, and put it in writing. He said, of course. I scored in the 93rd percentile for my age group across all categories. I didn't tell Marcus. The filing came on a Tuesday in October. I was eating oatmeal and reading the paper when the process server knocked. Marcus, acting through an attorney named Philip Stokes, a man with an office downtown and a website that listed elder law as a specialty, had filed a petition for guardianship and conservatorship. The claim was that I was no longer capable of managing my own financial and personal affairs, that I presented a danger to myself, that without court intervention, I was at risk of financial exploitation. The irony of that last part is something I've had a lot of time to sit with. The petition included a declaration from a doctor Renata had apparently found, I'll call him Dr. Holloway because his name deserves to be attached to what he did, who had evaluated me for approximately 45 minutes at a clinic I'd never agreed to visit. Marcus had driven me there 6 weeks earlier under the pretense of a routine checkup for a prescription refill. Dr. Holloway's declaration stated that I exhibited significant markers of early-stage cognitive decline and demonstrated difficulty with sequential reasoning and short-term memory recall. 45 minutes, a man I'd never met before, and he'd handed my son a document that could take my life away from me. I sat at the kitchen table for about an hour after the process server left. Then I made 3 phone calls. The first was to an elder law attorney named Sandra Voss, whose name I'd written in my address book 2 months earlier, because I'd seen this coming, slowly, like weather. The second was to Dr. Okafor. The third was to my neighbor, a retired county sheriff's deputy named Frank, who'd been watching my house for the past several weeks and writing down dates and times in a small spiral notebook because I'd asked him to. Sandra Voss was 62. Wore her hair short and silver, and had been doing this work for 28 years. When I sat across from her desk and laid out everything I had, the timeline, Dr. Timeline, Okafor's documentation, Frank's notebook, the records I'd pulled from my own phone showing the calls Marcus said had happened that never did, she looked at it all for a long time. Then she looked at me. Mr. Calloway, she said, do you understand that what you're describing is elder abuse? I told her I did. She said, good, because that's what we're going to call it. I want to tell you about something I did in those 8 weeks between the filing and the hearing, because it matters. I had a voice-activated recorder, one of those small digital ones, the size of a thumb drive, that I kept in my shirt pocket. I'd ordered it online in September before the petition was even filed, because something in my gut told me I needed to be documenting everything. When Marcus came to visit, it was recording. When Renata called and steered the conversation toward the property, it was recording. When a man I didn't recognize showed up at my door one afternoon claiming to be a social worker doing a wellness check that I'd never been informed of, it was recording. And then there was the one conversation I almost didn't get. 3 weeks before the hearing, Marcus came for dinner. We had pork chops. He was relaxed that night, confident, I think because he believed the wheels were in motion and there was nothing left to stop them. He talked about his plans for the commercial property. He mentioned a buyer he already had in mind. He said in a moment of what I can only describe as carelessness that the sale would solve a lot of problems for both of us, that his company's financing issues would be taken care of, and I'd be set up somewhere comfortable. Somewhere comfortable. I had a bite of pork chop and said, that sounds nice. The recorder got every word. The hearing was on a Wednesday morning in November. The courtroom was small. It's not a criminal proceeding. It's a probate matter, so there's no jury, no dramatic gallery. Just a judge, a few attorneys, a court reporter, and the people involved. I wore my good gray suit. Linda had picked it out for my retirement party. I got it dry cleaned the week before. Marcus and Renata were already there when I arrived with Sandra. Marcus had on a dark blue suit. Renata was next to him. Their attorney, Philip Stokes, was talking to Marcus in a low voice, and they both looked up when I walked in. Marcus's expression was, I've thought about how to describe this. It was the expression of a man who has calculated the odds and is comfortable with them. Stokes presented their case first. He called Dr. Tyne. Holloway, who restated his assessment with the careful language of someone who does this professionally. He called the financial advisor Marcus had apparently consulted, who testified about the complexity of my estate and the risks of mismanagement. He painted a picture of a vulnerable elderly man and over his head being eroded by time. And then he made a mistake. He put Marcus on the stand to testify about incidents of my confusion. Marcus talked for about 20 minutes. He was smooth. He'd clearly prepared. He talked about the utility bill, about Thanksgiving, about a time he claimed I'd left a stove on and nearly caused a fire. Sandra let him finish. Then she stood up. She introduced Dr. Okafor, who testified about the formal cognitive evaluation and my 93rd percentile results. She introduced the timeline of documented calls, or rather, the absence of calls Marcus had claimed occurred. She introduced Frank's notebook, which had documented 3 separate occasions when vehicles not belonging to me had been parked in front of my house for extended periods, including on dates when Marcus had told the court he had no contact with me, and then Sandra asked the judge for permission to play an audio recording. I watched Marcus's face in that moment. I watched it the way you watch something you've been waiting to see for a long time. The color didn't drain. It shifted. He went from confident to very still. Renata put her hand on his arm. The recording from the dinner played in that small courtroom. Marcus's voice, my voice, pork chops, the commercial property. Solve a lot of problems. Some more comfortable. Clear as anything. Judge Patricia Harmon, she'd been on the bench for 19 years, Sandra told me, listened to the entire recording without expression. When it finished, she asked Stokes if he'd like a brief recess. Stokes said yes, quickly. The recess lasted about 40 minutes. When we came back, Stokes informed the court that his client was withdrawing the petition. Judge Harmon looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at me. She said, "Mr. Calloway, do you wish to pursue any additional remedies?" Sandra had prepared me for this moment. I'd thought about it for weeks. About anger. About what I was owed. About what a jury might think of an audio recording of a man discussing selling his father's property to cover his own business debts. I looked at my son across that small room. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the table. I thought about Linda. About what she would want. About the fact that she loved Marcus in the way that mothers love their firstborn, with a completeness that has nothing to do with whether the child deserves it. I said, "Your Honor, I'd like the court to note the fraudulent nature of the medical evaluation submitted by the petitioner. I'd like that referred to the appropriate licensing board, and I'd like my legal fees recovered." Judge Harmon nodded. Then she said, "I'm also referring this matter to the district attorney's office for review under Oregon's elder abuse statutes. The court will retain jurisdiction." She brought the gavel down. Not hard, just final. That was 6 months ago. The licensing board opened an investigation into Dr. Holloway. Last I heard, his license is under review. Philip Stokes withdrew from representing Marcus shortly after the hearing. I imagine that relationship soured quickly. The district attorney's office has been in contact with Sandra. She tells me the process is slow but moving. Marcus called me twice in December. I didn't answer. Pauline flew up from Albuquerque in January, and we sat in the living room, and she cried, and I told her it was okay, that people make choices, and then they live with them, and that I was fine. I am fine. More than fine. The commercial property is still mine. I've updated my estate documents with Sandra's help. Everything is in a trust now, properly structured, with Pauline as trustee if I ever genuinely need one. Dr. Okafor has my updated file. Frank still waves from his driveway every morning when I get the paper. Some people have asked me how I knew, how I started preparing before the filing even happened. I don't have a dramatic answer for that. It was small things. The folder with the dividers. The way Marcus's handshake felt different when I didn't sign those first documents. A feeling in my chest that I've learned, in 67 years, to take seriously. Linda used to say I was the most patient man she'd ever met. She meant it as a compliment, mostly. Though sometimes she said it the way you say something about a person that is both a strength and an exasperation. She was right, though. I am patient. I waited. I documented. I wore my good gray suit. And when the moment came, I let the recording speak for itself. Some things don't need to be said out loud. Some things just need to be heard. I've had a lot of time to think about what Marcus actually did wrong. Not the legal part. Sandra handled that. I mean the deeper thing, the mistake underneath the mistake. He assumed that because I was old, I was done thinking. That's the part that stays with me. Not the anger, not the betrayal. Though both of those were real, and I won't pretend otherwise. It's the assumption. He looked at me shuffling around in that house, eating oatmeal, watching the evening news, and he decided the gears had stopped turning. He saw the surface of a man winding down and concluded there was nothing left underneath worth accounting for. He was wrong. And the cost of being that wrong in that particular way tends to be significant. I don't think Marcus is a monster. I spent 6 months trying to be honest with myself about that because it would be easier if you were. Monsters are simple. What Marcus became is more complicated. A man who let financial pressure and a persuasive spouse gradually move the line of what he was willing to do, one small justification at a time. He probably told himself somewhere along the way that he was actually helping me, that he knew better, that I'd thank him eventually. That kind of self-deception requires a certain laziness of character. Not evil exactly, just an unwillingness to look directly at what you're doing and call it by its real name. I made different choices under pressure. When the petition arrived and I sat alone at that kitchen table, I could have panicked. I could have called Marcus and begged him to explain himself. I could have given in, signed something, let the path of least resistance carry me wherever I was going. Instead, I put on my thinking, the same way I used to approach a drainage problem at the county, methodically, without emotion clouding the engineering. What do I know? What can I prove? What do I do next? That's not a talent I was born with. It's something that gets built, slowly, over a lifetime of showing up and doing the work even when the outcome isn't guaranteed. Linda used to call it stubbornness. Maybe she was right, but I think there's a version of stubbornness that isn't about pride. It's about refusing to let circumstances make decisions that belong to you. The recorder in my shirt pocket. The call to Dr. Okafor. The name written in my address book 2 months before I needed it. None of those things happened by accident. They happened because I paid attention, because I took my own instincts seriously, and because I understood that no one was going to protect me if I didn't protect myself first. That's what I'd want anyone to take from this, if they're in something similar and looking for a handhold. Not that everything works out. Sometimes it doesn't. But that clarity is a form of power. Documentation is a form of power. Patience, real patience, the kind that doesn't flinch. That's a form of power too. And those things don't expire with age. They compound. Marcus lost because he underestimated me. But more than that, he lost because the story he told himself about who I was had no room in it for who I actually am. When you stop seeing people clearly, really seeing them, you start making errors. And eventually those errors find you in a small courtroom on a Wednesday morning in November, listening to your own voice on a recording with no good answer left to give. The gavel came down. I drove home. I made coffee and sat in Linda's chair and looked out the window for a while. I was still myself. That, in the end, was the whole point.